I'll be listening to the black scene, asking every question like it's a vaccine.
If you're paying attention to the actions of Uvalde police, then you're probably asking yourself, why would the police prevent parents from going in instead of going in with the parents? What if we told you that the police or the organizations that fund and instruct them have been practicing this for generations? What if we could show you that this black parenting plan was all about teaching parents, especially black parents, to feel helpless and defenseless? And what if we could draw a line through time to show you how it has never left us? It has just evolved over time to now include all families. And remember, black people have been warning that this was going to include us eventually, and now it does. Welcome to Anti-Racist News, where we cover the topics nobody else wants to. Now going forward, I need to issue a trigger warning to black families. We are going to be talking about chattel enslavement and the history of what this United States has done to black families. That includes children being stolen and sold. That includes children feeling isolated and alone. That includes children feeling so helpless that they're considering ending their own lives. Please be kind to your heart. A mother unleashed a piercing scream as her baby was ripped from her arms during a slave auction. Even as a lash cut her back, she refused to put her baby down and climb atop an auction block. That's not a movie script. That's real life. And some of you may not believe it, but that's because you were taught to be apathetic to the suffering of black people and black families. This is stuff that really happened and still happens to this day. But the child was torn from the arms of its mother amid the most heart-rending shrieks from the mother and child on the one hand, and the bitter oaths and cruel lashes from the tyrants on the other. This is a first-hand account of what occurred regularly in these United States of America. United, it seems, not in freedom or liberty, but in breaking apart the black family. During chattel enslavement, children were considered highly valuable property. Black children understood that at any time they could be sold, traded, or given away to any white person as property and stolen from their own families. If this doesn't break your heart, then we need to talk about the definition of the word apathy. These are children, fresh into life, having done literally no wrong. We can sit here and go on about religious concepts of original sin, but that is religion, not human life, and should never set a standard for how we treat other human beings. These children, often on religious precedent, were made to feel terrified, alone, helpless, as though this was their life. There's no dignity in that. Children who were taken against their will to do labor for mean, uncaring, unaccountable white people. Children who were driven to thoughts of suicide. Special note, black people have been running from white enforcers for a long time, long before the police existed. After it was made illegal to outright steal and sell children from their families, the South decided to enact black codes that would make nearly every aspect of life, not just black life, illegal. It was the racial enforcement of these laws against black people while simultaneously ignoring white people violating the same crimes that allowed for the further stress on the black family. White people believed that if you were going to be free, then you should be working, because what screams freedom more than forced labor requirements? By criminalizing joblessness, white lawmakers and white law enforcers were able to entrap black people in horrible labor contracts, or worse, be arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to unpaid labor. And if assigned fines, well, failure to pay resulted in a system called debt peonage. As a result of all these laws and effects, oftentimes black parents were found as unfit or not around, and their children would then be trafficked back into child labor exploitation, aka chattel enslavement for black children. Again, black families are being torn apart by white policies and white people, both in the North and South. And at the same exact time, white politicians in the North and South are promoting minstrel shows and stereotypes that black people are both lazy and violent at the same time. Black women were being devalued as mothers to their own children while simultaneously being forced into employment as mothers for white children, while being branded as lazy and unloving. The truth is that black women have always had the highest levels of labor market involvement. While black women are being called lazy, non-contributing members of society, 35.4% of married black women worked compared to only 7.3% of married white women. 73.3% of single black women had a job compared to only 23.8% of single white women. It sounds to me like white people are upset that black people will not fail. Is this why white people exploited black labor to build their own economy? And with all the work black women have put into this economy, do you think they'd get any recognition when social service programs came to pass? Well, not the kind you want. By design, these systems were racist and sexist, which directly target single black mothers as fathers are being hunted down by domestic white terrorist groups and laws that put them back into state-enforced chattel enslavement. TANF is the latest of such anti-black social assistance programs. And make no mistake, there is no severed connection between the auction blocks and TANF. Throughout time, we have allowed our politicians to continue to enact these harmful policies without so much as a thread of accountability. As a result, these programs continue for generations, constantly changing program names and logos the same way corporations change their names and logos when they start losing branding recognition or get caught violating human rights. And it's not that white women are innocent or white families are just going through it. This is a clear and direct targeted attack against black, indigenous, and families of color. All to return these families to low-wage, unstable jobs with no job security while white women get to stay at home and enjoy the benefits of the same social assistance programs. And it's not just black women being aggressed on. Black fathers are being hunted down in very specific ways, as we've mentioned, and we're going to get into that in a second. We have a trigger warning for this next part. While we will not be showing graphic images, we will be discussing a very horrid and atrocious series of violent attacks enacted on black human life over the color of one's skin, a thing that separates us by less than 0.01% of a genetic difference. This is not an easy discussion, but it needs to be had so that we understand and can move past the discussion portion and into the action phase. Lynchings were domestic terrorist acts to keep black people in line, which meant to keep black people believing they are inferior to white people based on the color of their skin. Had these events occurred against white people in even a fraction of the number, the US government would have moved to end them immediately. Because these things have lasting effects on the communities they impact, black people were forced through white domestic terrorism and lynching to uproot their lives and move to urban ghettos, which is just the white way of saying communities we will pull more resources from than we invest back into, if we invest back into them. All with the criminal justice system upholding violent attacks against black families. We've covered the following topic in the previous video, but you're going to learn as you follow us that there is a lot of overlap here, which is why it's important that when someone tells us who they are, we believe them. So when police target black men with arrests, violence, wrongful convictions, false imprisonment, and blatant media disinformation, it's no wonder the myth of the absent black father was so easy for white people to believe. But according to a CDC report, black fathers are still there, despite police brutality, despite being mostly arrested for weed while white people make billions off of it, despite that innocence is no longer grounds to overturn a sentence to hard labor, despite being told they are violent criminals and not good fathers, black fathers are showing up. In comes the CIA and their preface to the war on drugs. The CIA, who established contracts with other countries they would later dehumanize to flood black communities with cocaine. As the CIA has moved to cover up their footprints, statements funneled through mainstream news media generally reject CIA involvement overall. Some, however, failed to absolve the CIA's moves and attempted to paint the CIA as innocent because they didn't know what the long-term impacts of their actions would be. Then why the war on drugs? Like, if you're the ones who produce the drugs, if you're the ones who produce this problem, why the war on drugs? And how come that war on drugs has never involved any of the CIA members who have brought these drugs into this country? Why are black people suffering? The goal has always been to justify, reinforce, and expand upon the mass incarceration of black men, all to the end goal of making the prison system as profitable as chattel enslavement was in the 1800s. And the same families are doing this. In many cases, it's the same people. We just don't care to look at who created these policies. Since the minstrel shows began in the 1830s, US politicians and the general public have openly supported and upheld the cruel, hate-fueled, derogatory disinformation about black people. Personally, I'm still trying to figure out what a lazy, cowardly criminal could ever criminalize. Like, they're lazy and they're afraid. Aren't they more afraid to go back into chattel enslavement than they are violating the law? This doesn't make sense. Dear fellow Irish Americans, we were the main culprits in this horrid display of blackface. We even used it to directly empower our superiority of whiteness over blackness. This was just the beginning of generations of racist misinformation about black diaspora. This refusal of white society to question these thoughts and these illogical things being said about black people is exactly why DCYF and CPS were seen as the savior societies. But black parents are held to unrealistic standards, higher than white parents, which results in the CPS coming in, creating stress, traumatizing households, and otherwise destabilizing homes that just needed a little assistance. Imagine being investigated for neglect because you live in a marginalized community in a capitalist country run by white supremacist policies, all while not being white. Neglect. After everything this government has neglected on black people, after everything we have talked about so far and more, after the government stealing taxes from a community and never reinvesting, neglect. The psychological impacts include learned helplessness, confusion as to whether you deserve this fate, worry, and vulnerability. Black families especially have a generational trauma directly related to this inhumane abuse. Even though we know the foster care system is abusive in every way to children, we still allow it to occur. This is, in full effect, a continuation of Jim Crow era governmental policies being socially accepted by white people. Black families are and have been under attack. They merely want to live, but the US government and the rich seem determined to conserve chattel enslavement and the inhumane treatment of black people. This is pure anti-blackness. The question is, why don't we care? As white people, why don't we care? DCYF and CPS steal our children too. And sure, those agencies might help a few children that need it. But the amount of children they do not help because of the harm they are creating, it's not worth it. It's time we start demanding better services from our taxes. After all, why do we need a government to go around creating harm? We can have no government and harm can be created. We definitely don't need to be taxed for that to happen.
Booster injected, I'm ready to learn me something. Same skin, think fast doesn't equal same team.
What's that? You like my shirt? Oh, well, thank you. I got it from SDHtoronto.com, where they have a whole bunch of shirts just like it. SDHtoronto.com, attire that empowers you to have the difficult conversations. Also, it's black owned.